Good Guide London broadcast. My name is Fiona. I'm a Blue Badge tourist guide here in London, and Guide London is the sort of name of the website of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides. So there are about 600 of us in and around London, and we are bringing you these broadcasts 3 times a week at 4 o'clock on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we are into our 5th week of broadcasts now, and the weather is getting nicer all around us. It is most of us still mostly indoors, but that's fine, because I know that for the next half hour I'm going to be exploring the delights of one of the great museums of the world, the British Museum, a museum of civilization with millions of objects in its collection. So we're not going to try and get them all into the next 20 minutes with you here, but our speaker today, Themis, is going to take us on a lightning tour around the globe, looking at, focusing kind of mainly the some of the very powerful women who feature in the in some of the artefacts in the British Museum collection. But before we get onto that, it's bank holiday, a national holiday here in Britain today, and there's always a joke that bank holidays are the days when it rains, which is not true. Beautiful sunshine, at least in London here today, and we get 2 Mondays each May normally that we have as a national holiday. I know that in the States it is Memorial Day, so over there you are commemorating people who've lost their lives during conflict. And our equivalent of that we have in November. We have Remembrance Sunday on the anniversary, or the closest Sunday to the anniversary of the First World War. But we get the holiday, the day off in May. And I know very much for Americans as well that Memorial Day is kind of the beginning of the summer season, and the vacation season kind of starts now. And that's certainly true in London as well. By now, on a normal year, we would be well up and running and mightily busy. And actually bank holidays is when guides are quite busy working, because everyone else is on holiday wanting to explore. So actually that's when we quite often are at our busiest. So it's lovely to be here today communicating with you this way, even though I'm not out exploring the streets. Talking of which, don't know if you can hear that. That's a car alarm, I think, that's just gone off in my street. So hopefully won't be there too long. So also this week, appropriate enough timing, we have England Tourism Week, and that's an event that happens once a year. Normally it's a lot of talks and events and seminars and things celebrating tourism, talking about all the different guises that tourism is in sort of different ways around the country. And so that is still happening this week. It's like everything else, it's gone online, it's gone virtual, but it's still going on. And if you want to get involved, if you've been on a trip to England in the past, you've got 3 days to go and rummage through your photos and find the best image, your favourite image from your trip. It might have been the most unexpected place that you discovered, or the best meal that you had, or just some place that you really enjoyed. Find your favourite photo from the trip, and on Thursday, you can put it on Twitter with this hashtag Throwback Thursday. And what we want to do on Thursday is flood Twitter with fabulous photos of folks having fun all around England. So that's the plan. And what's really lovely about these broadcasts is we've noticed over time that there are people all around the world watching this, and please do get involved. Put your questions and queries and things and comments, and tell us where you're watching from. And if it's live, we'll see that live, and if you're catching up later, we'll still get to see it later on as well. So it's really nice to know that we're reaching out around the world to you, even if you can't physically come to us at the moment. So big week in London for tourism, and big museum to explore today. So I'm going to introduce our speaker, Themis Halvantzi-Stringer, who is going to take us around the British Museum. Hello.
Well, hello, Fiona. Thank you very much for that introduction, and hello to everybody around the world. I feel quite, well, I wouldn't call it emotional, but quite proud that I can share my most favorite museum in London with everybody. And this actually is quite a saying, because there are a lot of museums in London. Like Fiona, I too am a blue badge tourist guide, but in a previous life, as I would like to say, I studied archaeology. So the British Museum is really, for me, a home from home. Now, as a museum, it's actually one of the oldest museums in the world. It opened its doors for the first time in 1759. And originally, it was a museum that had objects of natural history, science, art, archaeology. It even was a library, the British Library. But now, they have scaled down all their different collections. They have created different museums for the natural history, for the science. The British Library is a different building now. And the British Museum just is for human history and archaeology. As Fiona said, the collection of the British Museum is estimated to be around 9 million objects. So don't worry, we're not going to see them all today. But the curators are still collecting today, and they're collecting what will become the antiquities of the future. Things like mobile phones from the 1990s, some of the very first credit cards. I'm even considering actually donating my computer. It's that old. But most people manage to come to the British Museum to see some of the best examples of antiquities anywhere around the world. Objects like, for example, the Rosetta Stone, which is one of the most photographed objects in the museum. Now, it doesn't look particularly impressive. It is just a granite stone, and it has an inscription in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, in ancient Egyptian demotic script, and in ancient Greek. But when they actually used the ancient Greek to decipher the ancient hieroglyphs, they realized that they've opened the whole world of ancient Egypt to everybody to study. What does the text say? Well, it's one of the most boring texts that you can imagine. It talks about taxes and privileges that are given to temples in ancient Egypt. But never mind about that. You can also see some other equally famous objects, like, for example, the sculptures from the Parthenon frieze. And these are ancient Greek sculptures from Athens, from the temple dedicated to the goddess Athena. Not only they are considered, and very rightly so, masterpieces of ancient Greek art, they have had one of the biggest influences in Western art for the last 2,500 years. You can see, if you go for size, you can see some of the biggest sculptures that you can possibly experience, like, for example, this colossal or gigantic sculpture of a winged bull that comes from the palace of Khorsabad in modern-day Iraq. This sculpture weighs about 50 tons, and it was an absolute massive undertaking to bring it to the British Museum. It used to stand as a guardian at the palace gates, but today you can actually see it as one of the most impressive collections of ancient Assyrian antiquities in the museum. Or you can choose to go to the upper part of the museum and see the collection of mummies from ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptians decided to mummify their most important dead, and then they placed these mummies in very elaborately decorated tombs. And one such example of a nicely decorated tomb is what you see in your screen. This is a painting from the tomb of Nebamun, from Western Thebes, and you can see the dead man himself right in the middle of the painting wearing a white skirt. Well, actually it's a kilt, but you can call it a skirt as well if you want to. So he's hunting with his wife and his daughter in the marshes, and it's an absolutely beautiful everyday scene from ancient Egypt. But you can also see objects from Britain, because it is the British Museum after all. For example, you can see a helmet that was found in an excavation of an Anglo-Saxon burial. The king who was buried inside this mound in Sutton Hoo in eastern Anglia, we don't really know his name, but his burial was so wealthy that archaeologists compared it to the one of the king Tutankhamun. in ancient Egypt. Now, these are some of the famous things that you can actually see at the British Museum. But how did the museum come to be? Well, the basis of the museum was a large collection of curiosities that belonged to Sir Hans Sloane. Sir Hans Sloane was an 18th century doctor. He was doctor to kings of Britain. And today we could actually say that maybe he had a bit of an obsessive compulsive streak into him because he just bought anything that he could lay his hands on. He bought ancient books, he bought antiquities, he bought tapestries, he bought all sorts of things, even snail shells, because they were there, so why not buy them? When he died, he had about 70,000 objects in his collection, but he stipulated in his will that if anybody was willing to pay £20,000 for them, it would go to that bidder. And the great British public decided to bid for the Hans Sloane collection, and that was the material basis of the museum. But there is an ideological basis to the museum as well, and that is the 17th century intellectual movement of the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment as a movement emphasized human reason. It was saying, the basic idea was that by observation, you can actually learn about other cultures, other civilizations, and as a result, about yourself. And that is one of the reasons why the 17th and 18th century are called the Age of Reason. Now, this idea of enlightenment, you can actually even see it in action in the building of the British Museum today. What you see in your screen at the moment is a picture of the central yard, the great court in the British Museum. And it's a beautiful space, full of light, full of people. It's really, really one of the very nice spaces in the museum. But as you come to it, from the dark galleries where you have seen all these objects, you come from darkness to light. You come from the darkness of ignorance to the light of enlightenment. So it's a very, very nice connection to the museum. And as you're at the Great Court, you can actually see hundreds of people from all different nationalities, lots of different languages are spoken. And that is also what connects the British Museum with the idea that it is a museum of the world for the world. Now, unfortunately, noble as some of the ideas of the Enlightenment were, the actions behind collecting has come under heavy criticism in the last few years. There are many considerations about the ethics behind displaying human remains, about ancestor figures being under windows and displays. There's an ongoing debate about the return of cultural artifacts back to their countries of origin. There are also considerations, very weighty considerations about the representation of minorities, about what can be seen as one-sided heritage interpretation, about even the underplaying of the role of women in history. And that's exactly why we're going to see some very powerful women. And the very first person that I would like to talk about comes from the very ancient past. She's a lady who was alive 4,600 years ago, and she was a queen of Sumeria. Her name was Queen Pu Abe. And what you can actually see is an impression of a cylinder sail. Cylinder sails were very, very tiny objects. They were actually about the size of matchsticks. So what you see displayed there, imagine it being carved in a circular object that is about the size of a matchstick. But you can actually see the queen herself. She's just underneath those two red arrows on the top left register and then on the bottom right register. And what she's doing in both scenes is actually drinking. At the top, she's actually drinking something from a very, very big pot using a straw. In the bottom part, she's drinking from a cup. So she must have been quite a party girl, my kind of girl, that kind of thing. But how do we know that she was important? Well, 4,600 years ago, there are very, very few mentions of women. And wherever we have mentions of women, they're normally referred to by the names of their husbands, not their own name. But Puabi is referred to on her own. And also she has the titles of Nin or Eresh, which translate as queen or priestess. So she was a very important person in her own right. And now archaeologists think that she might have been a ruler in her own right. When she died, she was buried at the Royal Cemetery of Ur, and her burial was one of the most elaborate burials that have ever been found, basically because it wasn't looted. What you see now is one of the headdresses that were found during the excavation of her tomb, and that actually is at the British Museum as well, so you can see it for real when you visit. Together with Puabi, at the entrance of your grave, there were another 52 people, attendants, servants, guards, buried together with her, and also animals such as a horse, a lion, even a chariot was included in her burial. And the British excavator who was doing the work in the Royal Cemetery of War actually believed that some of these people might have been poisoned deliberately so that they would follow the queen in the afterlife. You can actually see him in the next picture. He's on the right side of your screen. And what he's holding is the head of a gold bull. And very famously, he wrote in his excavation diary, we're doing marvelously well, but I'm sick to death of getting out gold headdresses. There are other things that are wonderful. I think that's kind of an understatement, but he was really one of the most important excavators of his age. And I'll give you a little quiz, and you can answer towards. You can write your answers in, and we'll see if anybody has got it at the end of the presentation. Do you know which two famous British authors, a man and a woman, helped Leonard Woolley with his excavations? Answers at the end. Now, our next important person is from the New World. We're going to Mexico, and we're going to the Mayan city of Attilan. What you see is one of a series of lintels or carvings that belong to that are part of the British Museum collection. You can actually read them, kind of like we read cartoon strips in magazines, that kind of thing. And what you see there is a man and a woman. The man is standing up, and he's the king. His name is Lord Shield Jaguar. And the woman is called Lady Kabal Zook. She's his wife. He's holding a thing that looks like a spear, or maybe it is a torch. So what is happening, most probably, is happening either at night, or it is inside the chamber, or maybe in a dark temple. And Lady Zook, we can actually see her kneeling in front of her husband. What she's doing in the next detail that you can see is that she's doing something gruesome. She's pulling a rope which has thorns or sharp flints through her tongue, and she's creating a stream of blood that comes out of her mouth and soaks paper in a bowl that's just in front of her at the bottom left side of the whole scene. And that is a very important ritual. She's basically going to use this as a way of summoning the gods to help her husband. So you can see what happens next. On the left side of the screen, she has performed the bloodletting, and now she's actually summoning a spirit, a god, who will help facilitate the help for her husband. Now, she was from a very important, Lady Zook was from a very important family. Zook is the dynasty name, the aristocratic name that she shared with other people, and it means shark. So as powerful an animal a shark is, that's how powerful the clan of the Zooks were. And we can see how powerful she was, because even though she's seeing this vision of a serpent opening its mouth and a god coming out of it with a spear just above her head, she's not afraid at all. She's actually going to perform the ritual. We know that she was really very fearsome, and actually she could have been involved in military action under the title of a general. When her husband, Shield Jaguar, died, she actually ruled on behalf of her son for 7 years. So she became a king herself. Now, another powerful lady who this time comes from Africa also helped her son with her military actions. Now we see a mask that shows Queen Idia, and she was the mother of the king or Oba of Benin. Benin is in modern day Nigeria. And what you see is actually the face of the queen. She's very, very, she's very fierce. She doesn't smile. She looks straight at us. And you can see those 2 strips above her eyes. And they would have been filled in originally by iron, which was a very expensive metal for people at the time. She also has something which shows how important she is. She has a crown of tiny little Western heads. You can see it on your right side of the screen. No, these are not octopuses, by the way, or octopi. Not sure which is the correct thing. These are heads possibly of Portuguese merchants. And she's so big and so powerful that they're tiny in comparison. Now, this whole mask is made out of ivory, which is another very precious metal, very precious material, and it was worn as a hip mask, meaning that it would hang from the waist of the king. He would only wear it in very important ceremonies. So he was wearing it as close to his body as possible. It was the closest that a mother could be to a child. She was a real person, Idia. She was the mother of Oba Esigi, and she helped him successfully in his military campaigns. She actually ran his army. And when she died, he actually created the title of Queen Mother for her. And after that, all the mothers of the Obas had the title of Queen Mother. Now, this object is in the British Museum today, but the way that it found its way to the collection is one of the most shameful stories of colonialism of the 19th century. It was actually looted when a British expedition destroyed the city of Benin, burned it to the ground, and it was brought in and sold like basically for the worth of the ivory, not for the amazing artifact that it is. But sometimes things come full circle, and this particular object and the powerful figure of Queen Idia was actually the inspiration behind Ramonda, the warrior queen mother of Wakanda, in the 2018 film Black Panther. If you haven't seen it, it's a great film, very well worth watching. And from one warrior queen to another woman who has actually been responsible for the destruction of the city, for the burning of the city. And I'm talking about the city of Troy. And yes, I am going to talk about the face that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topless towers of Ilium. Anybody knows what the quote is, who the quote is from? Maybe answers at the end. And what you see is basically a very big pot, a crater, and it was used in ancient Greece for mixing wine and water together so that you could serve it to more guests at a big dinner party. But right at the top of the crater, you have a scene with a ship, and at the corner, you have a man and a woman. The man is right in the center of the scene, and he's stepping towards the prow of the ship. He's holding the woman by the hand. He has grabbed her like that. So it's not really all that willing to go. We can say that she's a woman because she's wearing this very long skirt, but she's also holding a round object on her hand, and that might be a wedding wreath. So maybe this is a picture of a union, and this could be a representation of Helen of Troy and Paris, the younger son of King Priam. So Paris was a prince, and he traveled to Sparta because he was promised by Queen Aphrodite that he would become the husband of the most beautiful woman of the world. And there was no other woman more beautiful than Queen Helen. Never mind about the fact that she was married. She was married to King Menelaus of Sparta. Never mind about the fact that she had a child. Never mind about the fact that she was several years his senior. He wanted her, and he had to have her. He brings her back to Troy with him, and this is one of the most famous situations in ancient Greek art. When he takes her to Troy, he will start a war. And this is the famous Trojan War, which was famously exploited by Homer in his epic Iliad. Now, all this is supposed to have happened more than 3,000 years ago, but the quest for the city of Troy occupied the imagination of people ever since then. And historians from the 16th century onwards have always been trying to find where the city of Troy was. The excavations done by Heinrich Schliemann to find the city of Troy, to find the city of Ilium, are now considered the beginning of archaeology as a discipline. And all this because of a woman. Now, you can't tell me she's not powerful enough, can you? Now, I know you can't see all these things with your own eyes, but that doesn't mean that you can't visit the British Museum. There is a way around it. Just like you see me virtually, you can visit the museum virtually. The British Museum has worked a lot with Google, and they have created a virtual tour of the museum. So you can you actually see how you can go in and have a look at some of these objects again. Or even better, wait until the lockdowns are out, and then you can come back to London and see them with your own eyes. Now, thank you very much for your attention, and back to Fiona.
Thank you, Themis. That was fabulous, and it's it's such a treasure trove, the British Museum. Even those of us who know it reasonably well, who kind of work there quite often, there's little nooks and corners that we might not know as well, and that are still lovely and surprising to find out more about it. Janine beat me to it. She says she was here 3 years ago. You could spend a week just in this museum, and she's not wrong. At least a week you could easily spend in the museum. But thank you so much for And do you have a favorite piece or thing that you like sharing with people inside the museum?
Well, that's a very difficult question, because every week I have a different favorite. My current favorite, which actually started my whole idea about doing this presentation for this week, is the Greek crater, the one with Helen of Troy. Mm-hmm. So this is my favorite for this week, but maybe next week a different thing.
Yeah, well, why not? And lots of love in the comments for the British Museum. One not so loving towards Paris. He's not a hero in this story. But no one's come up with any names. So I'm going to jump in and say I think I know the female writer who was involved in the dig. I think that's Agatha Christie.
That's absolutely right. Well done.
Yep, but I don't know the man, so you can.
Well, the man, he's not so well known for his book, though he did actually write a very, very interesting book, which is called The 7 Pillars of Wisdom. It is T.E. Lawrence, and we actually know him as Lawrence of Arabia.
Okay, there you go.
And Lawrence of Arabia, together with Leonard Woolley, did a series of excavations in what is modern-day Syria and the city of Carchemish. So they excavated together.
Yeah, fabulous. also lots of people from exactly all around the world. I'm not going to bring them all up individually because we'd be here a while, but we've got people watching from Italy, from Hungary. Hello, Hedvig again. I know you've watched quite a few. From Nova Scotia in Canada, at least 2 from the US, from Brazil, from Taiwan, from Portugal, from Colorado, from Slovenia, and of course from sunny Liverpool. So we are indeed connecting the world. Right and proper in a talk about a museum which has stuff from all around the world. So that all seems marvelous. And if you want to get in touch with Themis or myself, then you can, or indeed you just want to. Sorry, I'm just trying to multitask here. Find out all about guides, tours that you can do in London, then this is the Guide London website, so guidelondon.org.uk, and you can see here some of the details of the popular tours we run, including there right in the middle, the British Museum, and a nice bit of reading you can do on there as well, because down the bottom of this we've got blog posts and things, and on the right hand side here, this one, 6 objects from World War II, and that little boat is one of the most I find emotional objects that there is in the Imperial War Museum. It's just a very ordinary little rowing boat, but it has an extraordinary tale to tell. So have a look at this blog post. And if you want to find guides, then up the top here, looking at the Blue Badge Tourist Guides, click on that and you can find links to all of the people who've been involved in these broadcasts through the time. And I should tell you what's coming up next week. So we have Wednesday is the National Health Service, which is obviously very topical at the moment, but something that a lot of people very passionate about in Britain, and I think something that lots of people from around the world don't necessarily. It's a bit vague how it works and things, so hopefully we'll clear all that up for you. And then Friday we have the Excitements of Greenwich, a lovely sort of villagey feel part of London, sort of quite close to central London, but fabulously quiet and home to big museums and all sorts of delightful buildings and history. And then on Monday, the British Library, which of course is an offshoot from today's institution, the British Museum. So we're continuing on in the same theme, if you like, with that. So do get in touch, and thank you once again. Thank you to Themis for a fabulous talk today, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you again next time on Guide London.